other half on the primary side is getting back to space and the whole Launch America side of things. So, in returning to space, didn't want this to be a full history lesson, so we'll briefly touch on the whole idea of the space race and the Apollo program. I believe most of our attendees here probably remember a few of those items. We'll talk about the International Space Station, the part I'm most familiar with, how we get to space and future plans on how we get to space more efficiently, and moving beyond in 2020. So with the space race, primarily between the Soviet Union and the United States, the Soviets were able to launch their first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, 4th of October, and the U.S. quickly followed on the 1st of February the year following with Explorer 1. First man, again, Soviets took the lead on that one with Yuri, and USA following somewhat closely behind, just a month behind with Alan Shepard, with a suborbital launch with the Mercury Freedom 7. And the first woman in the space, this one I had not been fully familiar with until more recently, with the Soviets launching in 1963 and the US only in 1983. But we did win getting to the moon on 1961 when JFK announced, and then by 69 actually landing boots on the ground with the third space program with the Apollo program. So Apollo being the third space flight program, which was lasting between 61 and 72, succeeded in putting boots on ground, as it were, boots on moon, between 69 and 72. And what I have down there are the test crafts, the test launch vehicles, as well as the actual vehicles that launched us from Earth into space. The Saturn 1B and the Saturn 5, of course, being the ones that we used to do orbits and actually getting us out of the Earth's gravity well and to the moon. Scale is always a bit of a difficult thing to comprehend when it comes to some of our vehicles. It does say 361 feet there, but without having a scale reference, that just is somewhat hard to imagine. Here's a photo of the Saturn V over in Houston in Rocket Park, in the Saturn V hangar, as it were. And at the top is the crew module, the more rusted looking piece of the vehicle. And then here's the engine end, as it were, the working end of it all. And again, it's very difficult to see and get a sense of scale on how large these engines actually are. So here is me standing in front of one of them. I stand at about 5'6". So that's just one engine that you can see there of the 5 for the Saturn V. Currently, how we're getting to space, we are using 4 different organizations give us our cargo resupply vehicles, and 2 for crew, for humans to travel up and down. The 4 cargo, Progress, HTV, Cygnus, and Dragon 2, and they are provided by Roscosmos, which is the Russian agency, JAXA, the Japanese agency, Northrop Grumman, and working with NASA, and Space Exploration Technologies, or otherwise known as SpaceX, also working with NASA. There you can see the kilogram load for payload. That is not indicative of the vehicle weight. That is just the payload weight that they are able to carry up and down. The number sign, the pound sign with letter designation, is what we use, I guess, in the industry to designate which vehicle is going. So, for example, for Progress MS, we might say, oh, this is 57P. So this is the 57th Progress mission. HTV-9 is the most recent JAXA HTV vehicle going up. NG-14 will actually be launching this October. I believe they had to push it back by about a month or two. SpaceX-21 will also be launching later this year. And those are just the designations of the numbers of how many vehicles have been flown. For the crewed, same system, 67S, or Crew 1 in relation to Crew Dragon. Crew 1 will be launching later this year. The vehicle that was just launched recently with our 2 NASA astronauts was Demo 2. So that was the designation that was used on there. So Crew 1 will be flying later this year, hopefully with 4 other astronauts, I believe 3 US astronauts and 1 from the JAXA side. FPIP is our Flight Planning Integration Panel, and they produce this beautiful spreadsheet here on what is going up, what is up, when is it planned on coming down, et cetera, et cetera. This one in particular is from 2016, 2017, and was available for me to use as publicly displayed. Generally, most of the more common ones or more recent ones are not. Nothing is secret or top secret or confidential, just one of those, well, if it doesn't need to go outside of the agency, then it shouldn't. But this one is one of the publicly available ones, but of course dating back for 16, 17. The FPIP goes on for about 5 pages. Our current FPIP goes out to 2024. I believe they're putting out 2025 as well. So we have an idea of how many astronauts will be on orbit, what is being launched, what vehicle is being launched, how long it'll be up there, and such as that. Along on this FPIP, starting from the top going to the bottom, so we'll see the astronauts, which group they're a part of, how long they'll be on orbit, the Soyuz lit landing schedule, and any stage spacewalks or EVAs. And you can actually see where we plan. This is an American. If it's red or has the R, that designates that it's a Roscosmos, and that they are doing an EVA out. The blue ones are US astronauts, and then next to it, it'll say Node 2 or EXPCA. That is where they will be coming out of or what their mission is working on. Port utilization. So these are all the ports on the ISS, or I guess you could say parking spaces, that our vehicles can be tied up to. Starting at the top is MRM2 on the Zenith side, MRM1 on the Nadir side, Dock 1, SM aft, N2 on the forward side, N2 on the Zenith side, N2 on the Nadir, and N1 on the Nadir. Zenith being that it is the side of the station that is on the furthest side from Earth, so the side facing space. Nadir being the one facing Earth. And then moving down, any external cargo that will be on some of our crafts. That being unpressurized, so it doesn't have to be within an atmosphere. It can just be, it can live with no atmosphere. And then at the bottom, as I had said previously, there's Spacex 9 launching on July 18th of 2016. There's Progress 64, Soyuz 48. So looking at this, there's a lot of information crammed for, in this space, about a year and a few months. So moving on ahead into the future, a lot of different companies are making more vehicles for us to get up and resupply ISS or future satellite stations, either around Earth or around the Moon or Mars in the future. For cargo-wise, we're looking at Soyuz. So they're renaming their future vehicle to be Soyuz instead of Progress, coming in with 1,966 kilograms. HTV is coming, or JAXA is coming out with their new HTV vehicle, the HTV-X. Sierra Nevada Corporation is coming out with their Dream Chaser at 5,000 kilos for pressurized cargo and 500 kilos for unpressurized cargo. And Starship, as they're aiming for right now, 150,000 kilograms. SpaceX is being very ambitious with this, and they're still in their testing phases. Unfortunately, the most recent vehicle, SN4 of the Starship series, exploded. But with most things, as we're trying to make sure that things are safe, and we'd rather have these failures happen in advance, and we learn from them and make them better as we move on. For crewed vehicles, moving on into the future, we're looking at Orion, which will be hopefully lunar and Mars. vehicle and will have a crew of about 6, and it is being produced by Lockheed Martin, along with a few other partners. Orel is being produced by Roscosmos for their lunar lander, so they will hopefully get boots on ground some point in the future, and they're looking at crewing for people on their vehicle. Biconic Space Vehicle is the current name for Blue Origin's orbital, and that is going into Low Earth Orbit, LEO, and unknown on the size of crew that we'll have at the moment. CTS-100 Starliner by Boeing, again for Low Earth Orbit, hopefully for about 7 crew members. That one is still going through a few trials. I believe there's going to be another orbital flight test, OFT-2, hopefully either later this year or at the beginning of next year, to make sure that everything is certified and that the CTS-100 vehicle can actually make it to the ISS and dock and be safe. And of course, Starship, not only can it do cargo, it can do crewed, and their current mission spec is not only can it do lower Earth orbit, not only can it get to the moon or Mars, but their destination could theoretically be any part of the solar system. Again, very and we'll see how that comes around. Oh, that was weird. That just cut out for a moment. So yeah, Space Exploration Technologies, in case you didn't get, that's the full name for SpaceX. International Space Station. So what is it? It's a modular, habitable space station in low Earth orbit, LEO. The ISS program is a multinational collaborative between the 5 participating space agencies, NASA, Roscosmos, JAXA, ESA, and CISA, or CSA. ESA is the European Space Agency, and CSA is the Canadian Space Agency. But between those 5 agencies, we work very well together and closely together in ensuring the ISS stays up and sending up astronauts from our 5 agencies to be our scientists in space and keep that laboratory going. It serves as a microgravity and space environment research lab in which scientific experiments are conducted in astrobiology, astronomy, meteorology, physics, and other fields. It's a very catch-all statement with that. And if you've ever wondered how the ISS got built, here's a little kind of run-through of that. So it started off with the functional block from Russia, and then Unity Node 1 from the US, and then Russia again, Truss Segment 1, Segment 6, along with our solars and radiators. And then Canadarm2, which has become a very integral part with ISS and working things outside without sending anybody out. And then the truss segments that start going out, another radiator. More external stowage platforms. And here's a very interesting piece that, and I'll pause it here, of why we retracted this solar panel. One would think that if we're in space, we want as much power as we could possibly have. Why would you take out a solar panel? Well, unfortunately, they didn't realize this at the time, but since we had this solar panel extended out, it was blocking any rays getting onto the solar panel that was just installed. So after a few weeks, or about a month or so, they were able to realize that, ended up retracting, and they still had enough power to be functional in orbit until they could get the other 3 solar arrays onto station. Here is segment 3 and 4, retracting the other solar panel. Our nodes, which allow visiting vehicles to connect to. Reallocating where that solar panel array and radiator will go. Harmony node moving again. Columbus, which is sent up by ESA. Kibo, which is sent up by JAXA. And here comes the exposed facility for GEM. Logistic carriers. The cupola being moved to pre-position for Tranquility to be placed in. Cupola being repositioned back. And there we have it, as it is currently today. Pause there so you can take a brief look at what has happened over essentially the last 20 years in assembling this station as it currently stands. Now, what is it like on the ISS, and where is it? Well, what is it like on the ISS? We can take a look at a wonderful Google Earth look at this. Google was able to send up one of its wonderful little cameras, and you can actually tour the ISS from home using Google Earth. Now, I will say, if you do get motion sickness from any visuals or whatnot, this may cause some motion sickness watching this because of how Google Earth works when you go in and out of things. So that we are in the front part, as it were, of the ISS. On this side, we have the Columbus module, which is monitored and hosted by ESA. Here we can go into that. It may look like some of your bedrooms or homes, depending on the time of day or year. It is an organized chaos. Everything that is up there is known and labeled. And what we see here on the sides are the experimentation racks. And this is where payloads will fit generally about that size and go in here. So here we can see about 8 different science, maybe 7, I think this one's a double, science modules working here. And here we have some storage units for some items. Move back to the main area. We'll go into the GEM side, the Japanese side. This is Melfi. Melfi is one of the payloads I work with. Minus 80 degree containment unit. It's a really low-end freezer for science payloads. You can see the number of laptops that are here as well. All of these are marked, labeled, and ensured that they work well on station and are communicating nicely throughout the station and the network on there. You wouldn't believe the amount of requirements that are levied just for security protocols. You'll see a lot of hoses coming out, going here and there and everywhere else. Some of these are power, some of these are air, water, or MTL, medium liquid temperature, so like cooling lines. There's a vacuum system that if a payload needs vacuum pressurization or unpressurization for their science, for their payload, they can hook up to one of these units as well. But these racks are not only on top but bottom, but I guess everything is relative, because in space on the ISS everything is in 0G, so you're floating. Everything is very relative, hence the terms nadir, zenith, aft, port, starboard, all of that is used on station. So here we'll kind of move down corridors here. And I will place a link in the general chat for this for Discord, so you can get to this and explore it on your own. And Ken, if you'd like, I can take all these URLs, put it in a document for you. I'll put it and send it in an email if you wish to distribute it to those that may not be as familiar with Discord and its inner workings. Of course. Here you can kind of see this is where the astronauts suit up and do their EVAs and spacewalks. Over here is where where the more private quarters, as it were. Here's the cupola as it currently sits. I think it's this way. Yes, and this is the windowed portion that you see in a lot of images, looking down at Earth. And over here you can see I believe, is that a Progress or a Soyuz? I believe that might be Soyuz. So one of my current payloads actually is asking to be in this and grab footage for one of their science missions. And I can't go much into what that payload is until it actually comes back to Earth. So look forward to more information on that one. The reason I say this this node or this portion of the ISS is unique and more private quarters is because it is one of the toilet systems that is on the ISS. So of course it does need to have a bit of privacy, and certain things that we take for granted here on Earth, mainly gravity and the function of a toilet, they've had to figure out how to do in space. More or less, this is a vacuum system and a vacuum hose for your number 1 and number 2 needs. So one of our newer payloads that's going up soon is a new toilet to test to see if it's easier to work with our crew and such like that. Here we have one of our little kitchen modules. You can see some food as our astronauts have prepared. And going through some cargo, here's where we'll see a very distinct look between primarily the US side and the Roscosmos side, the Russian side. Everything's looks a little bit more old school. The space is very limited on the ISS, so wherever there is space, that won't interrupt the astronauts and crew from moving about the vehicle. It essentially gets tied down and stored there, hence we see a lot of things kind of just strapped to the ground or to the sides and ceiling. Again, everything relative. And then going back further, it's more of the optical instruments that are used on station. There's a lot of different cameras and lenses so we can take photos from that cupola portion, which I showed earlier, to Earth, or if a specific payload needs photos of their science. Another payload that I'm currently working on does require photos being taken at a certain interval. Luckily, it is not crew-tended. There is I believe they're planning on sending a GoPro on the payload itself, and it is programmed to take photos and video during certain times of the experiment. So yeah, essentially where there is space that won't interact with crew, it's a space to strap something down. And here we come across another mini kitchen or preparation area that the crew can use. And just laptops and iPads just kind of scattered about, depending on what payload is using it. And I believe at the very, very far back is just more cargo and payload and storage. If it goes up and has a place, then they know where it is. And the Russian toilet that they have. Let's see. Yeah, and that's the little walkthrough of ISS. Like I said, I'll put the link in the chat, and I'll give one to Dad Ken so you can distribute it out. If you wish to tour the ISS yourself, there are certain parts that you saw that there might have been arrows on either side. Please go right ahead, do as you like. Just know that it does do a weird flip at certain times when you're moving about the ISS. So, moving to that. So, where is it? How can I spot the station without, being a NASA engineer or being at Kennedy or Johnson Space Center? Luckily, there's this wonderful site sponsored by NASA on Spot the Station. and you can find sighting opportunities no matter where you are in the world. We will be focusing, of course, on the US here. And I will zoom in to Arizona. Since this is Yavapai chapter, we'll go to Prescott. And you can click on the icon, click on View Sighting Opportunities. And from here are all the times that you can see the ISS, how long it'll be visible for, what the maximum height will be above the horizon, where it will appear, and where it disappears. Now, if none of this makes sense, there's this wonderful little graphic and explanation of how the ISS will appear and disappear based off of the numbers that are on this side. So for the next, until the end of the month, if you're not waking up at 2:51 a.m. or 4:26 a.m., you may not really be able to see it. There are times in late afternoons and other early mornings, not as early as this, that the ISS is visible to the naked eye. So, go there. And part of this website, you can actually see where the ISS is right now. It is currently in daylight, moving into night over the southern Pacific. And on the bottom is the Google Maps relation of where that is. And if you're curious to know what it looks like outside of the ISS at this very moment, NASA has this wonderful other link of a 24/7 view of the ISS. In a few more minutes, this video feed will be black, and it's not that it's lost feed, unfortunately. It's just it's on the dark side of Earth, and well, there's no light to show. So there's plenty of resources out there to see the ISS, where it is, and everything else. The ISS does orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. So you can see a sunrise and sunset every 45 minutes. And it is one of the reasons for crew to ensure that they have a proper sleep pattern, because they can't depend on the circadian rhythm that is dependent of sunrise, sunset, there being light, absence of light. So they are put to a strict sleep schedule cycle. So, again, with relation and how big is something is, here's the ISS floating with the Earth behind it. Again, can't really tell how big something is by that. Here it is with the space shuttle. If you've seen the space shuttle in person, you can see how big and massive the ISS is. But again, it's very difficult to get that spatial relation. If you'd like, LEGO has now come out with a wonderful LEGO model set of the ISS with a tiny space shuttle and Soyuz capsule, or cargo capsule, with two little astronauts that you can position all around the LEGO model of the ISS. But jokes aside, this is about the relation of the ISS to something that I believe we're all familiar with, the US football field. So it's about as long as a standard US football field and about as wide, with the solar arrays extended and radiators and everything else. So on the science side of things with the ISS, things that I pointed out whilst we were doing that small tour, in the Columbus, here are the racks that deal with the science modules specifically. There may be other modules in Columbus that are not science related or such. They might be more life support or the internet or cooling systems or a water tank. But specifically, these are the 10 racks within the Columbus module, the ESA module. Here is the Kibo, the 8 that are in Kibo. And here are the 2 that I had mentioned earlier of Melfi, the minus 80 degree laboratory freezer for ISS. And it truly does get to negative 80 Celsius. Everything temperature-wise is done in Celsius. And you might see the Express name, Express there are these little inserts. So in an express rack, you can put 8 express payloads into that rack with connection for power, water, data, air system, cooling, etc., etc. So there's this one level here in the middle and one at the top that the payloads can connect to. And then in Destiny, the US side, we have our other 10. And these include another Melfi unit, the Wharf unit, Window Observational Research Facility, MSG, FUR and SIR, and 4 more Express Rec units. Now, FUR and SIR are our 2 more cautious racks that we have on Space Station. SIR being the combustion integrated rack, and FUR the fluids integrated rack. These 2 racks deal with observing how combustion, fire, anything explosive works in a zero-G environment. And fluids is the same side except for the fluids. How does micro droplets form? How do they behave in a microgravity environment? Now, for our DeMolay, and heck, for our dads out there, you can unmute yourselves because I guess this is a little bit more of a participation portion. When you light a match on Earth and you watch that flame, what happens to the flame? What is the orientation and shape? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. What we would call as like a flame point, something like that. Yes, the flame is generally pointed up. Archer, you were saying something?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? So now the question, what happens when you take gravity away? What happens to that flame?
Circular?
Yeah. The flame becomes spherical. And generally with a flame, it has the air coming in from the bottom and escaping out of the top. But when you have a sphere, it is completely dependent on the fuel, so the wood stick. So we find that flames in space burn cooler and longer than they would on Earth, mainly because oxygen can't quite get to the center of the flame to help fuel it, since it off-gasses in all directions. And the only fuel source that it has is that piece of wood for the stick. So here's just a photo from the SIR rack on one of its experiments. One of the more recent experiments that they're planning on doing in the future, as I can briefly and vaguely talk about, involves using more solid material to create flames and combustion, as opposed to liquid fuel sources. So previously they've used gasoline, hydrogen, propane, stuff like that, but now they're using somewhat akin to what we have with our solid rocket boosters, where it is a solid material that is being burned as opposed to a liquid or gas. So, moving on, beyond ISS and beyond 2020, the Artemis program. Artemis is the name for a new program, the twin sister of Apollo, and our main mission of it is getting the first woman and next man onto the moon by 2024. And they are looking at the southern pole, or the southern hemisphere of the moon, in order to get us there. Now, in testing this earlier, for some reason, audio wasn't transmitting well over this, so I will link these in the general chat of where we're going and how we're getting to the moon. I'll do that here shortly, because it gives a very good explanation onto what NASA and our partners in the international programs are doing in order to get us back there. But before that, here are the 6 main components, as it were, of getting us back to the moon and beyond. The ground systems, where are the rockets going to be launched from? The Space Launch System, the SLS, which is going to be our new vehicle in order to launch the new capsule, the Orion capsule, which will house our astronauts and crew going from Earth all the way to lunar orbit and on ground. or I shouldn't say just to lunar orbit, Gateway, which Orion will dock with and meet up with, and the lunar lander, which Gateway will use to transport and ferry between the lunar surface and Gateway itself to bring our astronauts up and down, and then back to Orion and back to Earth. And the new generation of spacesuits, the Artemis generation. A lot of lessons learned with the Apollo generation of spacesuits, which we are still currently using on ISS. Certain things like zippers. We learned that lunar dust is much finer than dust that we have dealt with here on Earth, and can get into the zippers and contaminate and break them down a lot quicker than what we had anticipated. So keeping those zippers much more clean and hidden and away from lunar dust, as well as flexibility and mobility. Imagine taking a balloon, putting yourself in the balloon, and then having to flex that balloon to move it. And that's what happens with a spacesuit. You have your atmospheric pressure inside pushing out on a vacuum. And with astronauts, they have to push against that resistance in order to move the spacesuit around. With the Artemis generation, the flexibility has been improved. There's a lot more articulating points on the new spacesuits. And they are able to do many more things than the Apollo generation was able to. These Artemis generation spacesuits are planned on being launched to the ISS for testing to ensure that they meet vacuum standards, actual vacuum standards, and more radiation. Granted, we do have test facilities on Earth, here in Houston, Huntsville, and around the United States to test these suits, but no test is as good as an actual test. So there are plans to send these Artemis generation spacesuits into orbit. Now, these next two videos I will link into general, and I will ask that you watch them on your own, as they do explain the new generation of Artemis. So, the first one, where are we going? And I have placed that into the general text channel, and you can view it within Discord as well. You don't have to go to an actual browser. And the second video of how we are going to the moon. So if we'll just take about 10 minutes to watch this, and we'll come back at about in 10 minutes. And are there any questions from our virtual audience?
I was watching the video. No problem.
I didn't know that about the pen story. Whenever someone tells me that joke now, I'm going to be that one guy that has to correct them.
Wait, what if their nose does itch?
Actually, that is something that they figured out and attached with our astronauts.
Really?
Within the helmet, I believe on the bottom right, there is a little hook thing that comes out that they are able to move their head to and actually scratch any part of their face. So yes, it is something that is that was added to the suit. On the wrists of the astronauts, on the suit itself, there are actually little mirrors, kind of like side view mirrors on a vehicle, so that they could see behind them and to the side of them when they are doing spacewalks.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, so is it a possibility that we send so many of these crafts up to space that there's like a whole town of just little pods and stuff?
Not necessarily, no. With our crafts that are being sent up, vehicles for ISS and like this, of the two, actually, you know what? Let me go back to my list. Here we go. How do we get to space? Of these vehicles, of the cargo vehicles, only one, the Dragon 2 cargo, actually returns to the ground. The other 3, Progress, HTV, and Cygnus, burn up in atmosphere. Of the crewed, well, we need the crew to come back, so both of these have to come back to Earth intact. But of these 4, these 3 just burn up in atmosphere. The crew to Dragon 2 cargo is the only one that comes back to Earth. Otherwise, they just burn up in atmosphere.
That leads me to a question, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
Studying the launch for an hour and a half, I didn't miss a beat on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a video camera of the first deployed booster that was supposed to, it had parachutes and it was supposed to return to Earth safely for reusal. And at that exact moment that it had separated, there was a screen that said, "We have temporarily lost the signal." And then right after that, there was this almost looking staged, landed on a platform thing that looked like the booster. Like, how could that be so perfectly landed? We didn't see anything of it floating through the atmosphere. And I got it on DVR, and I keep looking at it, and it's like they may have wanted it to return, but it burned up or something happened, and so they just threw that picture up there briefly. I don't know. So
what happened with that particular thing, so the stage 1 portion of Falcon, as you'd said, yes, it does separate from the stage 2 and the vehicle while it is launching the vehicle, and the stage 1, the first stage, returns. What ends up happening on the drone ship is that there is so much interference and shaking from the thrusters of the stage 1 returning on the boat that it does cut the signal out. They have landed successfully the stage 1 burners multiple times on land and on the drone ship. The drone ship is, of course, I Still Love You. And that's that little thing that you saw where it says video feed cut out, of course, I still love you, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But there is a video out there, and I'm trying to find it right now, of a helicopter view of the first stage landing on that drone ship.
Oh, wow. I'd love to have that.
And I will see if I can find it, and I will attach it in the document that I'll send to Dad Ken.
Okay.
But that's what happens, is that there's so much vibration and essentially turbulence that's coming off of the thrusters landing on that drone ship.
Okay.
That it cuts it out. That a camera can withstand a lot of stuff, but when you're putting that much fire and force onto it,
okay,
our current technologies can't. But yes, there are so many videos of it successfully landing and not successfully landing.
Right.
Let me see if I can find. I will put this on. I don't know how well it'll actually stream. Of the Falcon Heavy landing at Cape Canaveral. So Falcon Heavy is essentially taking 3 Falcon 9s, putting them together, and 2 of the Falcon 9 stages separate and return back. And the 3rd Falcon 9 stage landed on the ship. That one famously did not land on the ship. It landed just outside of it. So here we see the 2 Falcon 1 stages landing.
Wow.
At Cape Canaveral.
Okay. But there was one that's supposed to land on a drone ship, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yes, they most of them do land on drone ships now, and that's just because of the trajectory in which we're trying to catch the ISS. Generally, it's so far out that there's not enough fuel to put on the Falcon 9 Stage 1 portion to have it return to Cape Canaveral. So instead, they put, of course, I Still Love You, a few hundred miles offshore, and
And did
Just
it land
catch it
on,
there.
did it land on there?
Generally, they do, yes.
With the one from the latest.
The latest one, yes. And
Oh,
I will see if I can find that video of
Okay.
that drone ship landing.
That what I looked at was like the conspiracy theorists that say, "Oh, that Walk on the Moon was a Hollywood production."
Yes.
Signal lost. Oh, there it is. It's already landed. Okay.
No,
Hey.
and I have heard that theory as well. And here's I don't think April A successfully landed. This isn't the most recent launch because that was in May. But here is one of the Falcon 9's first stage returning on the drone ship.
Oh, cool.
And so here's that helicopter view of that landing.
Amazing.
And there's a lot of things that have to take into account here is the drone ship and the first stage are actually in communication with each other from separation till touchdown.
Okay.
And the drone ship itself moves itself to the position of estimated landing on the seas. And in that communication, so the ship itself is actually making corrections to catch the Falcon 9 Stage 1 return. And the Falcon 9 Stage 1 is also making corrections so that way they can both land at the same spot.
Wow.
In one of the failures, they looked at the data and it turned out that there was a time sequence that was off. And just it being off, I think by a few seconds or microseconds, it ended up landing like 20 feet off the boat and it just splashed right into the water.
Right.
But yeah, no, when it lands, and the Falcons are very large vehicles. Again, that whole idea of size and spatial relation. They just brought one here to Houston, and it's on display at Space Center Houston. Let's see if I can pull this guy up. Here we go. Here is some normal-sized humans.
Oh my!
By the base of a Falcon 9. So those are the legs that you see coming out when it lands on the drone ship or at Cape Canaveral on the landing zones. I have a buddy in he's living in Seattle right now, and he works for a machining company that is in partner with SpaceX to make parts for the vehicle. So on the last on the last launch and return, he was saying, "Oh, that I helped make that part right there."
Oh,
and
cool.
This and that. So a lot of us in the space industry have friends that are working on the other side of stuff, and we all keep in contact with things. But there's a good spatial relation, and this is I believe this is the drone boat. Of course, I still love you. So coming back into port.
Cool.
Yes, sir. Okay. Let me bring up some images. So, right before launch, all the computers on board of the vehicle and the rocket are talking to each other. In the event anything should happen, like there is a misfuel line or anything to that effect, that may cause a catastrophic unintended consequences of the spacecraft. The SpaceX, and I'm going off of SpaceX right now because it's our most recent vehicle to go up, will ignite its 8 Draco engines to separate itself from the first and second stage portion of the rocket. It will launch much faster than, let's say, if it was launched and something happened in middle of launch. Those Draco engines are so powerful that they separate quickly enough and get away from the vehicle, from the launch mechanism, faster than the explosion could possibly catch up.
Wow.
Those engines were originally, they wanted those engines to be used on return instead of using parachutes, but they found that the fuel load and cost to put more fuel on here to launch the fuel that's on there for it to return was too much. And getting that whole system to return to Earth with those engines was a lot more complicated than they anticipated. So instead, they opted to go with the parachute system, launching from the nose cone portion. Now, if I can pull this image up, here you can see partially the side where the Draco engines are at are these dark panels. There's 2 engines per section, and 8 in total. And that's what they use for that. There was a test of those engines being fired. They purposefully exploded the stage 1, stage 2 portions of a Falcon 9 and had the Dragon 2 crew capsule escape before anything happened. So that is available online. Yep. But it's absolutely fascinating to watch some of that stuff. With our previous generation of vehicles, there was the escape system was actually a separate unit on top of the craft itself. And after a certain height, that portion of the nose would separate from the craft itself. So I'm trying to multitask here. Here we go. So here, you'll see a small little dot come off from about here and eject itself off. That is the Falcon 9 being launched. And that little dot that you see right there is the capsule portion where the crew would be. Between the 2 systems, it detected that something, a catastrophic failure had happened on the launch portion, and signaled without any humans talking to each other to abort and to jettison the crew capsule before anything catastrophic could happen to the launch vehicle itself. And here you'll see it starts to tumble, and it will experience a load of pressure because it's just not flying in the right way and explode. And the crew vehicle is somewhere beyond the clouds up here.
Wow.
In this video, you'll see it actually come back down and return back to Earth. And this was also a test of the parachutes, which SpaceX had to go and learn how to redesign parachutes. Interesting portion of this is that NASA also learned they didn't know how to fully make parachutes either. One would think that parachutes, so simple. You make a simple rounded dome, it catches air and it slows you down. The issue that they were having is that the load of the parachutes holding the SpaceX Dragon vehicle is asymmetrical. So the vehicle isn't balanced in its center, it's off center. So they had to design the parachutes to open and fully deploy in such a way that could take an asymmetrical load while descending. So,
and kind of create symmetry on it.
Correct. So SpaceX did, I believe, about 24 tests of their Mark III parachutes, and there were NASA engineers that were with them because NASA didn't have the answers either. And the idea of science and everything else, you test, theorize, create a hypothesis, you test. Does it work with the hypothesis? No. One of my favorite jokes of science is generally it's not eureka that you would say when discovering something, but, that's funny. I will see if I can find the image of the abort system from the Apollo era, because it looks a lot like what's going to be flown with the Orion system. So, here we go. So here we have where the crew module would be, and then this entire tower is the actual escape portion, with the motors up on top and would fire downward to have it escape from where the rest of the rocket would be down here. So SpaceX said we're going to get away from this whole tower portion, which it has to jettison at some point when it gets to orbit, and they incorporated it into the actual vehicle. So I hope that answered that question, Ken. Yeah.
Got another question on your payloads.
Mhm.
What you may have already said it during the presentation. What specific payload types did you personally implement into the SpaceX launch this time?
Okay, so for Demo 2,
Right.
very few items went up. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without giving so much that I can't say away. There are certain requirements on SpaceX's side that are still a little too high for some payloads to be on. We'll say, for example, an acceleration load, for example. That the current standard that SpaceX has for their demo vehicle was a little too high than what we currently have for NASA and for all of our international partners. And there weren't enough payloads that could test to that acceleration load in time, or they just couldn't survive it. So going up, a lot of the stuff on Demo 2 was not necessarily science payloads, but quality of life payloads, as it were. So either food resources, water, fuel for the ISS itself, because the ISS needs fuel in order to raise its orbit, because it slowly falls, and then every few weeks it boosts back up, back into orbit. Mm-hmm. It sits about 400 miles above Earth,
Right.
traveling at 17,000 miles per hour.
Right.
So going up on Demo 2, I don't have any payloads. Coming down on Demo 2, I do have some payloads. And yeah, that's really it.
Cool.
So I know now that in the suit there's like a really top of the line way to scratch your nose. Are there any other like really odd but convenient things inside the suit?
Yes. There's a cooling system that essentially runs throughout the suit to help cool the astronaut, especially when they're on the sun side. Temperatures can get excess of several hundred degrees Celsius and go well below freezing on the dark side. So their suit needs to be able to moderate the temperature inside the suit so that it's habitable and that the astronaut, the crew member, doesn't burn up or freeze while it's in there. So there is a heating device and a cooling device in those suits. One of the more, I shouldn't say more interesting, one of the interesting side bits about a astronaut doing an EVA is bathroom usage. Sometimes these spacewalks tend to last several hours. So NASA, and in their genius and everyone else's genius, because it takes a while to get in and out of that suit, and you're not about to stop a spacewalk to bring a crew member back in to use the restroom. So they tried figuring out different ways of doing it, and the simplest way was, well, just have them wear an adult diaper.
Do they wear socks?
That I'm not sure about. I believe they do, but a lot of times from the stories that I have heard from astronauts that have gone on spacewalks, you don't really use your legs that often. Everything is with your arms because you're pulling yourself either along the truss of the International Space Station and you clip onto the next one. Everything is more hands than it is feet. So I'm unsure about socks.
Maybe I shouldn't have asked my question.
No, it's fine.
I now know that astronauts wear adult diapers.
Yep, during EVAs when they're in their spacesuits. So, yeah, that whole little toilet system, it's rather ingenious how they've managed to work that and, not, let's say, stink up the station.
Kind of sucks you out, doesn't it?
It does have a little bit of a vacuum pressure on it, yes, on both the hose attachment and the seat, yes.
That's pretty cool.
Wait, so we're all about exploring the space, but Space Force. What about Space Force? Because you're supposed to be defending space, even though we haven't really explored any of it.
So part of the Space Force with their new directive is not necessarily defending the territories and the exploration thereof, but our assets that are in space. So looking at our satellites that are there, the capabilities that they have to defend against electronic jamming or debris from space debris that exists in space. There are well over, what is the number? Somewhere around the order of several tens of thousands to millions of particles of space debris that are monitored. And part of that was incorporated into the Air Force. They had a monitoring system that actually tracked pieces of debris that were larger than 5 centimeters, I believe. And part of those responsibilities have now moved over to the Space Force. So if they track a piece of debris that's going to one of their defense satellites or one of our geostationary GPS satellites, which is used by millions of people, not only the military, they can tell that satellite, okay, you need to move out of the way at this time to avoid this piece of debris. So that's part of their mission, their inherited missions with the Space Force. But soon, who knows how long that will take? It may end up being something akin to Star Trek, where we are actually putting defense units in orbit.
So on the space station, are they able to dodge bullets of debris, I guess you'd say?
Of a certain size, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that they do more than just sit up there. They have to.
Oh yes, they do have to maneuver with certain things. There was an incident earlier this year with an Indian satellite that was out of commission, and I believe one of our U.S. satellites, and they were to come within, I think, a few hundred feet of each other with a potential collision. So they were able to maneuver the U.S. satellite around and over the Indian satellite to not cause that collision. Most of these satellites are slow in a decaying orbit, meaning that it'll take a few years for them to come back to Earth's atmosphere and burn up. But there are a few others that are out there that they'll just be out there for, if not years, a few decades.
Wow.
Any other questions?
I got a dumb question.
Yeah, go for it.
They have all this technology to go to space and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't they have technology to become invisible or something?
The bending of light and optics is a lot harder than putting a stick of dynamite underneath something and launching it into space. It's much easier to control an explosion, which is essentially how we're doing it, than it is to bend light, which would be making something invisible. Now, that isn't to say that that stuff isn't being worked on. I believe there's a European company that has a piece of glass that makes whatever it is behind it optically invisible. And it essentially bends the light in such a way that it goes around the person and it only shows what's behind the person or object.
A Klingon.
Now, what if you had like a camera behind you and like the entire front of you is kind of like a flexible screen or something like that?
I can't quite say on all that. I just know that the technologies involved in optics is a lot harder than controlling an explosion. But good question, either way.
Donka.
Didn't we make no wait, what company? A company made an invisible bullet train or a bending light.
Invisible bullet what?
It was a bullet train that a company or a country made.
I'm not familiar with that.
Wait, did you say invisible bullet?
Invisible bullet train.
Bullet. What's the point of an invisible bullet if it's going so fast the naked eye couldn't see it? I mean, like, they have tracers that actually help you see the bullet, so that way you can actually, help perfect your aiming. But I don't see really what the use of an invisible bullet is.
Bullet train, like choo-choo train.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
I can't hear you on my end.
I'm sorry, my mic is garbage.
Yeah, it's a little low, but no worries. I heard you and I understood.
Oh, he's cutting out.
So
Any other questions?
become
What's something top secret that the general public doesn't know about that you can tell?
If it's top secret, I can't talk about it.
What's something that most people don't know, but you are allowed to tell?
That most people don't know, but I am allowed to tell you.
The Earth is actually round.
How do you know?
Here, I put the train in chat.
Interesting. I will have to take a look at that later.
We can see it in the thumbnail.
I would probably say maybe the diaper thing that I can think of right now. I find out more things about stuff that happens on ISS and whatnot every day. It's always a learning experience with some of my colleagues.
I'm talking about something that's more like that most people would think is like a secret, not something dumb like a diaper.
I don't really have an answer for that.
All right, spill the beans. Are aliens real?
There have been enough UFO sightings, and who released it? Department of Defense released videos of UFO videos. So,
Confirmed.
Eric, do you know that incident with the space station? It was either a satellite or a space station. They were taking video of Earth, like a bit farther out, which would allow us to like see a lot more of the Earth, like the actual thing actually round. Would be that far in orbit. All these a bunch of lights started popping up on screen and started floating around before the camera had to cut out. Not even cut out. NASA blurred the camera. Let me find it.
I don't know of that specific incident. I know that there are issues with certain satellites reflecting sunlight and causing glints like that. It's one of the issues with the Starlink system that SpaceX is working on, the internet from space, as it were. Their current satellites are so reflective that you can see them from Earth, and it's actually getting in the way of certain views from space. So astronomers, when they're looking through telescopes and taking photos of deep space objects, they're getting white streaks across the photos because of these satellites. But in your specific question and example, I'm unsure. Oh, you linked it.
I think it's that one. I'm pretty sure anyway.
Subject, but what about the materials of the new spacesuits versus the old ones? That wouldn't be secret.
It wouldn't be no, but maybe the implementation of how they do it potentially.
Right.
If it's done for the secrecy of the United States, then yes, it might be rated to a classification secret or above.
Certain metals in there, certain fibers mixed.
I do not recall the actual construction of the materials, but it is more advanced than the Apollo era, making it lighter also. So
yeah, I could tell that.
But it is the new spacesuits are still just as bulky because you need to essentially keep a life support system, electronics, communications, and all your tools and everything on a single person. So
more flexible when you look at them on TV.
Oh yes, no. When they did the demo of the new, it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And whenever everything starts opening up after this COVID thing, I would love to go to Houston or to Johnson Space Center next door to me and go and see the suits.
That'd be cool. Hey Ken, we should have another one of these in a few months from him.
Evidence of the aliens shall come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started developing the PowerPoint first from my my work laptop. Just that's where I have a lot of my resources. But unfortunately, I couldn't use that one because it was on a more secure system and anything leaking out. So I had to transfer it all to my home machine and work off of only the openly available stuff that I could find, and my own knowledge of working there.
Well, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 6. And I knew that as being an asthmatic, that wasn't going to happen. So this is fascinating to me.
Well, yeah. I'm glad that I was able to at least entertain you all for, about an hour and a half.
That's great.
Miss you all too. Well, you're all very welcome, and if we want to, like was said, if we want to do this again, then I don't mind. Just let me know in enough advance time, and I'll get something drummed up together and present again. And if you want, get the lodge involved. I know you sent the email to the lodge, but oh well.
Yeah, it should have been involved. That's all I gotta say.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, with some of the other vehicles like CTS 100 Starliner, the Boeing version, all that I know is what is publicly available so far from their tests. Because we do have a few people in my building that are working on that specific vehicle, and they're not even able to talk about it inside the building. If you're not a part of the program, you can't talk about it. But I know that with the previous launch of CFT-1, or OFT-1, Orbital Flight Test 1, there was an issue between the timing, the clocks, as it were, between the crew module portion and the launcher vehicle. And what ended up happening is that when it got up to space and to orbit to meet up with ISS, the clock on the crew portion thought it was a different time. So it went into autonomous mode. It started firing off thrusters much earlier than it should have. And it burnt a lot more fuel than it needed to. And it burned so much fuel that it couldn't get up to ISS, back off of ISS, and back onto Earth safely. So they decided, we'll just let CTS-100 orbit Earth for a few times and bring her back down. And it landed safely. It went up, came back down. That was the one issue. The guys from Boeing and NASA did say that if there were humans on board that particular craft, they would have noticed the issue well before people on ground did. The other, I guess, perfect storm scenario that happened with this is that as CTS-100 was going around the Earth, it was in between two other satellites that were communicating with it. So it entered a dead zone when it started firing those thrusters. If there were crew on board, they would have seen and noticed, oh, wait, engines are firing. That's not supposed to fire. And they would have been able to cut off those engines and do a manual override and flown the vehicle without the computer. But since it was autonomous and without crew, things happened, and they started looking at the software code to see what happened. But that was one of the main issues, is that there was a clock discrepancy between the vehicle and when it launched.
And the delay, yeah. Wow.
So that's one little bit. But as far as like Dream Chaser with Sierra Nevada coming forward, and Starliner with SpaceX, the 100-passenger vehicle, nothing. I'm not familiar with anything other than what's already been published.
Wait, so do you actually believe in the aliens?
Do I personally believe in aliens?
Yes.
It's not outside of the realm. If you want to get in depth with something, research Fermi's paradox of life and if there are aliens. Fermi's paradox, and it talks about if there is the Great Barrier, the Great Filter, and other such things. Of, are we really the most advanced species out there because we're so far ahead in the grand scheme of a species? Is there a filter that filters out species and we haven't hit that filter? Have we advanced enough that we are actually beyond that filter? Fermi's paradox. There's a few YouTube videos on it that describe it in much better terms than I can.
That's actually really interesting. What do y'all think? Everybody else?
I think I'll look at Fermi's paradox.
I'll look into paradox. I'm going to look into paradox before making an official statement.
Oh my god!
I will see if I can find that particular video that I'm speaking about.
I found like two of them on YouTube. The U.S. Navy or something releasing of unidentified aerial phenomenons or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't there another thing about? There's another YouTube video explaining that it would be very bad if we were to actually meet other life more advanced than us.
In ways that it could be bad, but I mean, maybe they're not as hostile as everybody thinks, but they probably are.
In the general chat, I've linked two videos from Kutzkagar in a nutshell. It's a wonderful little science series that takes really complicated concepts and breaks it down in much simpler terms and very awesome graphics. And it's a two-part for Fermi's paradox. So I linked that in the general text chat. So go ahead and take a look at that. I'll try to remember to link this into the the document I'll send you that will go out to everyone else, as this was a follow-up question.
But all right, so another dumb question: do you think if we were to meet extraterrestrial life, do you think it'd be the humans that would probably mess it up?
Unknown.
because we aren't really the sharpest knives in the drawer when it comes to stuff we don't know about.
Depends on who goes out to interact with whatever other life form it may be.
It also
The U.S. government.
it also depends on how the military reacts if they see it first.
Oh, die, boys.
There's a lot of dependencies on that, and given our current political climate, I don't know that I have a correct or good answer for that.
Back
Also,
to your
yeah,
presentation, Eric, those two videos that we were going to watch, two short ones, I watched one of them, and then you guys started talking. Are you sending those to Ken, or what was the deal there?
I will link all the videos that I've shown here, the ISS tour portion. I'll put that into a document and I'll give that to Ken, and then he can distribute it as need be.
My son would really like to see those, I'm sure.
Of course.
Okay, well, get with it.
Understood.
Okay.
All right, I will try to gather something together this evening. Oh, none at all. I'm not sure about actual releasing. Like, let's say if I were to give you, if you were recording this in full and then rebroadcast, I'm not quite sure on that side of it all quite yet. I know as a presentation, it was okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I wouldn't be object to it, no.
Is that an Egyptian head behind you on the wall there?
Oh, it's a Buddha head.
Oh, okay.
I found it at an estate sale. It was beautiful, and I got it.
It was a gift from the aliens.
Eric.
Funny thing, my time here in Houston, I have not interacted with a single one. I've actually interacted with two while I was back in Prescott, and yeah, that was because they were Embry-Riddle alum. I believe a former NASA astronaut. I'm just not sure if they were an Embry-Riddle alum or if that was the one I met. Nicole Scott, one of the more recent astronauts, I've met her and chatted with her. Very lovely lady. So much information and stuff. If you ever get a chance to watch any of their interviews or things after they've come back down, it's amazing. The Canadian commander, and his name is escaping me right now. He's able to break down these complicated concepts and whatnot of his life on station and being launched and back, and he does it in such an amazing way. Yeah, and it's not Chris Cassidy, that's a recent one. I'm blanking right now.
Eric, I don't know if I ever shared with you about my senior year in pharmacy school. I rented from Thomas Stafford's mother and her little house, and his childhood house in Oklahoma. And he came to visit his mom after the Apollo Soyuz mission.
Okay.
And I got an Apollo Soyuz patch that was up in space that he was in that mission. And he was just this down to earth, oaky guy. And he's in his 80s now. But so yeah, it was he was a DeMolay.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Shriner. He's a Mason. He's the 33rd degree. And astronaut Thomas Stafford, General Stafford. So that is a pretty special moment in my life. Yeah. And his mom was great.
Hmm.
That's right. That's right. That's true.
Was it Chris Hadfield?
Yes, Chris
talking
Hadfield. Thank you. I'm blank. Tranquility Lodge. There we go. To tie space and everything back Masonically, if you will. Brother Buzz Aldrin
Yep.
helped found one of the lodges in my area here in Clear Lake. Lodge number 1417. Clear Lake Lodge number 1417 of AF and AM of Texas. And he helped found the lodge. He took a Masonic patch with him on the Apollo mission. And it went up and went back down, and it's currently sitting in the lodge right now.
Cool. Yeah.
One of the other things that he did, or that he helped kind of found, Tranquility Lodge number 2000. It is a, I don't want to say a fake lodge. It's secondary lodge under the Grand Lodge of Texas.
Like a daylight lodge or a...
It meets quarterly.
Okay.
But its current location can't be met officially because the Tranquility Lodge 2000 is technically on the moon.
Oh, wow.
One of the other things that apparently he took was a coin and a special dispensation for this lodge. So that went up, and it's up there, but they meet quarterly here in Texas. So that's a cool thing. I'm wanting to put my petition in one of these days and become a member. Yeah.
That's cool.
So they have a website. Let me pull it up real quick. For Tranquility Lodge. And it talks about some of the history with Texas and whatnot.
2000. Oh, wow. Awesome.
So their address is based here in Houston. Pasadena is one of the small little suburbs of Houston. But yeah, it talks about with Buzz Aldrin here at Clear Lake Lodge, 1417 AF and AM. But yeah, just to tie in that Masonic tie, as it were.
Nice.
All right. I sadly have to go now. This is always a lot of fun to do. But thank you for putting this on. But I have to go.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
you are very welcome.
It's only 10:30 for me. No worries. It's been an honor and a pleasure working and presenting to you guys.
Well, I think the move for you was really a great move.
It has been it's been mixed blessings, as it were.
Very cool. Yeah.
Will do. What probably after this COVID thing goes away, because the way Arizona's going and Texas is going, I don't think I'm traveling anytime soon. As far as I know, yes. Mom works at the VA, so she has to be sort of there. So,
Oh,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.